Tasty Metal Production channel here at YouTube, and welcome back to Metaltober. Now, for this episode, I'm going to be taking a look at 13 horror films that have a rock and metal soundtrack. Or rock and metal soundtracks, whatever. So, without further ado, let's definitely take a look at our 13. So, coming in at number 13, which all of these are not in order, at least. Some of these are not picked as favorites, so, but just 13 films. Alright, so, like I said, at 13 is Deathgasm from 2015. Now, this is a movie I've never seen, but I do know about its soundtrack. Now, pretty much its soundtrack is pretty much usually new wave or traditional heavy metal bands, and maybe some thrash, definitely some thrash on here, and at times maybe some black metal. One of the black metal bands being Emperor, and one of the death metal bands being Nunslaughter. However, for the new wave or traditional heavy metal bands was Skullfist and Razorwire. Razorwire being from New Zealand. And of course the thrash band being, of course, Axslash, of course, with the song Mark of the Pizzagram. So, it's a movie I do have to check out, and that's why I put it here pretty low. But I will definitely have to, but I do know some of these songs in here. Now, I don't remember what was the Skullfist track, but I just know that it's Skullfist, and that I do that during the trailer of the film, or the trailer for the film, to paraphrase it better, a Skullfist track plays during it. I know that it sounds like Skullfist. Anyways, so, coming in at number 12 is, of course, another movie I've not seen, but definitely have heard of and have seen still shots for, and that's, of course, is Rocktober Blood. Now, the reason it's on here is because, of course, sure, the movie itself seems to have a heavy metal theme to it. However, it's mostly the soundtrack is pretty much done by LA hard rock / heavy metal band Sorcery. Of course, not to be confused with the other Sorcery. Now, this ain't the first time that this band has actually done a soundtrack. They have done a soundtrack for the 1978 Australian, or was it 1979 that movie came out? Or the album? Anyways, it was for an Australian film called Stunt Rock. A film I've seen still shots, of course, we're looking at. That movie looks pretty fucking crazy. Anyways, again, for this, and I have listened to some of the music here, it's definitely kind of your bare bones, you know, typical heavy metal of the time. Definitely not bad, though, but for what it is, for what the movie seems to be, it fits it. Anyways, I'll have to definitely check out the movie itself. It's, of course, there's YouTube rips of it, or movie rips on YouTube, so I'll have to see the film there, maybe. Because I don't know if I'd pay that much for a DVD copy. I don't know. Even though the DVD copy is a DVD-R, as what I've heard. And of course the VHS, if someone's selling a VHS copy for like fucking $100 on Amazon, or a little over fucking $100. Enough said. Coming in at number 11 is, of course, the Black Roses soundtrack. Which, of course, was released by Metal Blade Records, and, of course, 1988, around the same time as the movie. Now, the movie, of course, I guess it makes kind of sense to have the Black Roses movie come after Rocktober Blood, because they're both similar films, in a way, from what I've heard. And from the still shots, it seems very similar. Rocker comes back from the dead and pretty much, well, kills his band members, whatever. It seems to be similar. So, now, which, for the most part, was a fictional band for the film, but was a studio-only project. Because we're talking about the band that actually recorded the actual music, But of course, some of the band members that are in the band that recorded the stuff for the actual band that is featured in the film, that was only made for the film, consists of musicians that were in other bands that also show up on the soundtrack. So that means Alex Woltman of Billy the Kid, Elliot Solomon of Lizzie Borden, Mick Sweeta, a Stormtrooper, the American Stormtrooper that released the Armies of the Night EP, which one of their songs would end up being covered by Flotsam Jetsam. King Cobra and Bolt Boys. Yeah. Go from Stormtrooper to King Cobra to then Bullet Boys. Nothing wrong. And of course, vocalist Mark III, now known as Marcy III, because he had a sex change. Of course, singer for King Cobra. Only sang at least on the first 2 albums, as far as I'm concerned. And of course, guitar winker Alex Massey. Now, I've not really checked out some of these songs, but I know that the soundtrack does feature songs from Lizzie Borden, King Cobra, and I think maybe even Alex Massey himself. But it's for the actual Black Roses band, which was only fictional for the film, so making it more like a studio project. Or so, kind of like that fucking Rockstar film, in a way. That Steel Dragon. Kind of like that. So, anyways, I've never seen the movie, but I do know of the soundtrack, and that's why it's in here. Because, again, like I said, this is all about rock and metal based horror movie or horror film soundtracks. Alright, so coming in at number 10, this film is almost odd to put on here, but it's only for the band that's in this film. And that's, of course, we're talking about the movie The Prowler from 1981, which, of course, is one of the few, or really early, Friday the 13th / Halloween ripoff films, in a way. But instead, it pretty much is about a World War II veteran who comes back from the war and pretty much kills his lover or so, I guess, who had been cheating on him during that, but then it kills her. Then years later, in the 1980s, pretty much goes out and kills a bunch of teens on prom night because he never had to he didn't have to feel that. He didn't get that that option, or so he didn't get that chance to live like that. So, anyways, back to it. The band. The reason I did put in here, it's not really a rock or heavy metal based film, but it has a band that was made for the film, just like Black Roses, but it's definitely still very within, like, kind of almost. It's not really good hard rock, but it's decent enough. It's, of course, with a band called Nowhere East. Again, put together only for the movie. And they only recorded about 3 songs, and for the most part are average hard rock songs, like I said, but are fine for what they are. The silly track Disco Blood, which I do recall hearing the film, is one of the more hard rockin' tracks. Unfortunately, I've yet to find the songs themselves, and it seems to be that the only way to hear them is through the film, which is like again I just pointed out, it's your average slasher film that is enjoyable at best. I'm just reading off what I wrote for this. Very much like, again, your typical fucking Halloween, Friday the 13th rip-off film. Anyways, like I said, you can't seem to find the songs by themselves on YouTube. But the only way you gotta hear them is through the actual movie. So, I don't know, maybe one of these, when they do, I don't know, I would like to kind of see these songs actually get put on an actual vinyl or so, maybe like a little EP or so if they wanted to, but anyways, they're not bad. So, in a way, because of the band Nowhere East being in the film, it's just a movie put together band who are, of course, just rock based. It's why I put The Prowler in this film. So, coming in at number 9 is, of course, the Monster Dog soundtrack, which, of course, was done by someone who's very influential with both the hard rock and metal scene. And I just reviewed his recent album this year. That's, of course, is Alice Cooper. Now, I could talk about the music, but I don't know if I ever care to actually talk about the film, because the more the less I have to talk about Monster Dog, the better I have. Ugh. Anyways, the soundtrack is not bad. It's definitely Alice Cooper still stuck in that zipper catches skin, special forces type of sound, or dada. But after this, of course, after the soundtrack, he then, 2 years later, he pretty much would release the Constrictor album, which, of course, would put him back on the hard rock metal spectrum of the 1980s throughout to present. Anyways, it's definitely not bad. Actually, the music itself is probably the best part of the film, if I have to really bog down on the film anymore. But it's not great either. But it's not terrible. Of course, if I have to say, Alice Cooper is, of course, in the film itself. However, the bizarre thing, his voice was dubbed. Because it was made by an Italian guy, and pretty much making an Italian film. If you know about early Italian films from at least the 1970s to maybe 1980s or so, most of the film process, they weren't able to record, I think, voice through film. They had to always dub over their voices. So that means having the actors have to redub in, or dub in the voices for themselves. However, Alice Cooper was never available to dub his voice, so they had to get someone else to dub him. So if you're watching the movie and you hear him actually talk, it's not Alice Cooper that's talking. It looks like Alice Cooper, and it is Alice Cooper, but it's not him, which is very fucking weird and bizarre. And it just adds to the bizarreness and a somewhat boring film. Yes. I can't believe I'm now talking about the damn movie. It's fucking boring. And it's very confusing. It's not really a good movie at all. But the soundtrack itself is probably better, but it's not great either as well. So, that's enough. I gotta talk about Monster Dog. So, moving on. Coming in at number 8 is, of course, the Maximum Overdrive soundtrack. Or AKA Who Made Who by AC/DC. Now, this of course was one of the first attempts of Stephen King directing. Because beforehand it was mostly other directors that were taking his novels or so and putting him in the live action film. This was his first, and it's not a really, I guess you could say it's not really a masterpiece of a film, but it's enjoyable for what it is, and it's not nearly as scary as what Stephen King hyped it up to be in his fucking trailers. Oh, I'm gonna scare the hell out of you. What you just did was you probably entertained the hell out of at least some of the people who actually probably enjoyed seeing pretty much a demolition derby, in a way. Still, it's not bad. It's not the most best film, but I like the film. Of course, the fact that you got AC/DC playing it and it's all about fucking trucks going around killing people or so, it's got a very metal aspect to it already. Still, definitely the soundtrack, of course. Of course, there is some bits of that were the score for the film, which of course again was also done by AC/DC. But some of the pieces, like the bluesy pieces or so, or even Cliff Williams' bass parts, which were almost like bass solos, were never quite released by themselves. So there's still quite a bit of AC/DC tracks that have yet to get put on record or on CD or cassette. And there's even a version of the song "Chase the Ace" that's kind of longer in the film. There's more parts of the Chase the Ace track that's was never put on the actual album. Like there was stuff that was that was cut out. So to hear the real full version of Chase the Ace, you have to watch the Maximum Overdrive movie. And just something that I quite caught on to. Still, nonetheless, definitely one of those soundtracks that definitely, when talking about metal or rock, hard rock and metal based, horror soundtracks, Maximum Overdrive should be one of the few movies that should definitely get brought up. So, coming in at number 7, as of course, is a movie that I do own, as probably one of the few talked movies within the VCLT, and especially within horror films or and such. I own it. I'm getting out my copy. Yeah. That's not it. No, that's not it. It's not it. Jesus fucking Christ, where did I put the copy? Here it is. As of course, again, talking about Trick or Treat. Which, of course, the soundtrack was done by Fastway, of course, best known for having a Motorhead, original Motorhead guitar player, Fast Eddie Clarke. Now, the film, definitely not a great film, but, of course, that's been said before, but I enjoy the film for what it is, and it's a movie that definitely turned me on to quite a bit of bands, even turned me on to Raven. And, of course, I found about Impaler as well through this movie, and Lizzie Borden. But again, it's kind of within like Rocktober Blood and Black Roses in a way, but instead of looking like an actual monster, it's just basically a fucking guy who basically, this Sammy Kerr guy, went and pretty much did black magic or so to where he dies, and pretty much to where his spirit gets put in a record, and the only way to play when you play the record, he of course gets summoned, and he's out, and then he's pretty much electricity or some shit going through television. He could be basically can fuck with reality. It's definitely not a bad film, but it's not a great film to begin with. Anyways, the soundtrack itself, like I said, is from Fastway, and it's definitely not bad. It's not nearly as great as, the first 2 Fastway albums, but it's not, I would say it's probably better than Waiting for the Night, I think that album was called. But still, it's definitely kind of typical, but it's not bad either. It fits the film. So that's enough talking about that. So coming in at number 6, probably one of my favorite horror movies, or one of the few horror movies that I've really come to really like in recent years. A movie I was always very interested in watching, but when I did back in 2014 on Halloween night, this was awesome. Demons! The Demons soundtrack. Great movie. Really, one of my favorite horror movies I've come to like in years. I didn't watch them when I was younger, but again, it's really one of those, when I first watched it, it became an instant favorite. Of course, the soundtrack itself, very hard rock or heavy metal based, having bands such as Saxon, Pretty Maids, Accept. Oh boy, the part with Accept's Fast as a Shark is fucking awesome. Even though this film, for the most part, when it starts, it definitely starts off like a typical horror film, but by the time you hit the part where Fast as a Shark plays, it pretty much almost turns like a fucking action film. It's like, you got this guy who's on this motorcycle inside the fucking theater, chopping off fucking demons' heads with a samurai sword while freaking Fast as a Shark is playing in the background. It's one of the most badass scenes I've seen in fucking horror cinema, probably since Evil Dead 2, and of course this movie predates Evil Dead 2. So it's like you could tell that maybe Sam Raimi could have took some cues from the Demons movie to kind of add at least to the second Evil Dead film. Still, great soundtrack nonetheless. I've also forgotten about Motley Crue being in the film. And even, of course, Billy Idol's also in the film. As, of course, I think it's White Wedding. Weird, but not bad. Still, great soundtrack, great movie. There was, of course, a second movie, but I didn't care as much for the second film. It's not bad, but the first movie, fucking great movie. Fucking great. Anyways, coming up is another, I guess you say another Dario Argento film, but I think this one he actually did direct. This, of course, was Phenomena. Now, the movie itself, like, again, it's not like Demons, but still, it's almost seen like Dario Argento's sort of take on the Carrie type of story. But, of course, it features a very young Jennifer Connelly, and, of course, the late, great, what's his name? Donald Pleasance. Great, good film, though. Definitely another good movie. But the soundtrack for it, of course, features Iron Maiden's Flash of the Blade and Motorhead's Locomotive. Which is so surprising that the fucking Locomotive track plays. It's the most... It almost seems like a very artsy way to put the track in. But it's definitely... It's kind of an odd part to put the track. Because it's very unexpected, but it's not terrible where the song gets put at. Still, good movie though. I definitely like the Phenomena film. But the soundtrack for having Motorhead and Iron Maiden deserve to get put in this list. Okay, so coming in at, I think the Demons was number 6, this was number 5. Okay, so coming in at number 4. So coming in at number 4 is, of course, and when putting this list together, which I had time to work throughout the whole weeks or so, movies was popping up. And this film definitely immediately popped up. That's, of course, was the Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 film. Not my favorite of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre films, but the soundtrack is fucking badass. You got bands from Wrath, you got Death Angel, you got Law's Rocket, you got Sacred Reich, and of course you got Obsession in the film. Of course, Obsession being Methods of Madness. Or Methods of Madness, whatever I think that track was called. Of course, I name-dropped the film during my reviews for pretty much for both Methods of Madness by Obsession and Annihilation Principle from Law's Rocket. Or I think even for the first review, any of those, I definitely had name-dropped this film. Mostly for turning me on to pretty much Obsession and Law's Rocket. Killer soundtrack, like I said. Of course, Death Angel being the track Bored off Frolic Through the Park. Wrath being, I think, When Worlds Collide. Being taken off the Nothing to Fear album. Of course, the Sacred Reich track being taken off the Surf Nicaragua EP. Just a really killer soundtrack for a not so very good film. But still, it's not terrible compared to the other Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie that came right after fucking part 3, which is part 4 of the Next Generation. Piece of shit film. Piece of shit. Anyways, still killer soundtrack for a meh type of film. Alright, so coming in at number 2, and of course these 2 and or 3 and 2, I forgot. 3 and 2 are pretty much kind of the same movie in a way, but being Sleepaway Camp 2 and 3. Now, the soundtrack for these 2 movies definitely metal or rock based, mostly heavy metal. The Sleepaway Camp 2 soundtrack pretty much having 2 songs from Anvil from the Strength of Steel album, and of course other being Hurricane. Kind of the most glam metal band on here. Of course, the singer of Hurricane will then later on sing with Foreigner. Still, not bad. Definitely not bad, but Anvil, fucking awesome. Yeah. Of course, even some of the records that show up in this film. I do remember spawning Death Angels, the Ultraviolence showing up in the film, like the record itself popping up. And of course, even there's a scene where even Flotsam and Jetsam's Doomsday for the Deceiver, that record just popping up in the film. I'm not going to say where, but if you have seen the Sleepaway Camp 2 movie, then you know where that scene is, where the Flotsam and Jetsam's Doomsday for the Deceiver shows up. So with that, that was number 3. Now number 2 is, of course, well, Sleepaway Camp 3, like I said. And this one, of course, features mostly Obsession is the one band that I definitely can think of. And mostly it's from the Methods of Madness album. Most of it. Because I don't think Scarred for Life was ever brought up, because in a way it just makes, it very much makes that the Methods of Madness album was Obsession's most biggest album, in a way. And since most of the songs like Killer Elite, and of course the song Methods of Madness, and even the ballady track off that album, which is escaping me right now, the title of it, but again, most of those 3 tracks pretty much play throughout the film, so in a way you could say that Obsession pretty much contributed the whole album to the film. Almost. Still, definitely a fun movie. I pretty much like all 3 of the Sleepaway Camp films, except for that 4th movie that came out way past the 80s. That one's not all that good, but the 3 ones are the only Sleepaway Camp movies that you at least need. So, with that was, of course, number 2. Finally, the number 1 film. This, of course, finally popped in my head yesterday, and I can't believe I was forgetting about this one. That, of course, is the Hellraiser 3 Hell on Earth soundtrack. Now, technically, you could say this is not the best within the Hellraiser series, but it still has a pretty good soundtrack, pretty much mostly consisting of Motorhead and Armored Saint. The Armored Saint tracks being at least from the Symbol of Salvation album, while the Motorhead tracks being, of course, is basically Motorhead's or Lemmy's pre-take on a song they wrote for Ozzy Osbourne for the No More Tears Now being the song Hellraiser. But there is a song that Motorhead did write for the film that can only be found on the soundtrack as far as I know, and that's, of course, was a song called Hell on Earth. Now, I've never seen that song pop up on any other Motorhead album or any compilation as far as I know. All I know that it shows up is on the Hellraiser 3 Hell on Earth soundtrack. That's the only way I know that you only can get this Motorhead song. Not everywhere else. So I'm making the soundtrack pretty much essential to get. Again, still, definitely, of course, the Hellraiser films anyway kind of feel very metal-based anyway, or metal-themed. I remember hearing that artist Ed Repka actually worked on, I think, the first movie, at least for the set of the film, as far as what I remember hearing. But I don't know if that could actually be true or not, but I remember hearing that from Wikipedia. But I don't know. Of course, it does seem, of course, when looking at the Hellraiser, the first Hellraiser film, almost does seem like a Ed Repka artwork, since most of Ed Repka's artwork almost have to have a guy that almost looks like fucking Butterball. Still, it's a good, still, not a bad movie at all, but good soundtrack for the film. Really good soundtrack. Anyways, hope you enjoyed this. If there is still a few more other horror films out there that has like a hard rock or heavy metal soundtrack, definitely name drop those in the comment section below, and give your thoughts on the soundtrack and the film yourself. And if you have seen most of these films or some of these, for the most part, definitely comment on them. So, hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll still see you out throughout Metaltober. So until then, this is Harry Fast Shed saying I am out, and I'll see you later, or see you within this month still. Take care.